systems go, the sun hasn't died. Deep in my bones, straight from inside. I'm waking up.
Well, it's time. We're going to Brendam. We're getting the engines all set up and they're saying their goodbyes as we don't know if we're all going to come back. Oliver, Toad, Emily and Duck are at the far back of the yard, and we've put some trucks in front of them to keep them hidden. Hank just told me Henry's fire is ready, so we're going to head off. I haven't prayed so much in my life. We've been traveling down the branch for a while now, and it's silent. We've stopped at each station to check for survivors, but nothing. The only real thing of notice was Trevor, but Big City Engine and Jinty had gotten to him first. Just like the others, he had been gutted. Not signal ounce of life remained in the traction engine. We stopped at Upper Brendam to see the docks, just as James described, completely gated off. Hank raised his hand out the cab ready to give the signal to charge. Once his hand lowered, I threw Henry's regulator hard on, and the cavalcade raced forward, smashing through the gates. Several armed men opened fire, but that didn't stop us. It soon became an all-out war. The soldiers and other survivors jumped from the coaches and opened fire. As we thought, we saw Boko and Derek sitting in the goods shed, and next to them were the hollowed-out corpses of Douglas, Donald and Spankam. Rosie dashed forward to save Boko, but she soon found herself being pushed back. Just then the engine pushing her blew his whistle, and there we saw a Big City Engine sitting idly in front of us, followed shortly by Jinty. The fighting ceased, and we all stared at the Terroyer and Pannier. Big City Engine laughed, saying how it was good to see us, and that he had been expecting us. Apparently he knew we were at Wellsworth the whole time, but wanted us to come to them. It was the perfect trap. He then dashed forward and bashed into Rosie. Jinty ran forward, rammed into us. Of course he wasn't too much of a problem, as we had an LMS-5 mount and Gertie 56 on our side. Henry yelled at Jinty asking why he would do this to his family, and Jinty didn't say anything. We quickly shoved him off, and he reversed out of sight. It was then when we heard screaming. It was Rosie. She somehow came off the rails and people were climbing all over her. Soldiers, survivors and Molly raced to her aid while we charged at Big City Engine. It didn't make any sense. The small Terroyer was putting up a fight against Henry, but goddamn LMS Danier 5 empty. Just then we felt a jerk, and that's when we noticed Cranky had latched his hook onto Big City Engine. Henry pushed with all his might and Molly ran through the crowd, running over anyone in his path. We then noticed men begin cutting at Cranky's face. The sounds of shrieks and groans emanated from his frames. It was then when we heard the sound of a whistle echoing in the distance. But it wasn't just a whistle, 4 whistles were heard. They're racing into the docks were Duck, Alfred, James, and Jinty of all engines. They charged into the back of us and sent Big City Engine flying backwards. The force was too much for Cranky as he toppled over. Big City Engine didn't get a chance to scream as he was crushed by the train. The docks soon fell silent. Big City Engine's remains had lit a blaze, and slowly the survivors and soldiers cheered. It was then when we finally saw who was driving Duck. It was none other than the Fat Controller. We're re-railing Rosie now, and thankfully she's alright. She got a few holes in her boiler, but Jem Cole said it would be fine for the time being until we got to Wellsworth. She also has a massive scar along her eye just like Molly. I'll make sure to get everyone's story once we get to Wellsworth. I've gotten everyone's story, and it all makes sense. When Alfred left, his one goal was to find Thomas and get reinforcements for Brendam. He did find Thomas, however he was too late. Thomas and Murdoch crashed through the works shed at Crovan's Gate and were both killed. It was then when he discovered Skarloey and Renia still in the shed. He updated them on everything that had happened, and they were relieved to know we were okay. It was then when James scampered in with the Fat Controller. They both decided to return to Sodor to help us with finding survivors. They quickly loaded Skarloey and Renia's onto a flatbed and took them to the mainland. Once they dropped them off, they returned to Sodor, where they reached Wellsworth to find Duck, Oliver, Toad and Emily in the goods shed. Topham knew that we would be in trouble and steamed up Duck, and the three dashed down the branch. Topham was determined not to lose any more of his engines, and that's when they were surprised to find Jinty leaving Brendam. They initially went to attack him, but he said that he was our side. James didn't buy it and questioned Jinty. The Pannier explained that he only followed Big City Engine out of fear. If he didn't listen to him, he would have been killed like Donald. James kept pestering Jinty until Duck told them both to shut up and follow along. They then raced into the docks to help us. We finally knew everything except for one thing. Jinty. After some question, Jinty broke and explained he was pulling a goods train to Brendam when the bomb landed. As he pulled into Brendam, he found Boko, Derek, and Donald in the goods shed. They sat around for a few days until they saw Douglas, who had been hiding in Henry's forest, roll in with a goods train. Douglas looked confused and dazed and noticed the 4 engines yelling for him to run. It was then when a horribly mutated Arthur and Bear rolled up beside him. He initially screamed, but stopped once he heard the quiet pleas for help from Arthur. Just as everyone calmed down, Big City Engine raced in and pushed Bear, sending him flying behind Douglas. Douglas yelled for Arthur to run, which he does at the pace of a snail. Big City Engine explained that he's been having to deal with those freaks the past few days. The 5 sane engines argue with him, telling him that the engines he killed were most likely scared and were coming to him for help, but Big City Engine wouldn't budge. Fights began to break out amongst the workmen about whether or not Big City Engine was in the right or wrong. It eventually escalated as gunshots echoed out in the crowd. A stray bullet was sent into a fuel tanker, lighting it ablaze. Boko, Donald and Derek escaped from the shed, but Jinty wasn't so lucky. He wasn't steamed and his crew was nowhere to be found. Big City Engine ran towards Jinty, but it was too late as the tankers exploded, throwing Jinty on his side, causing him to black out. He awoke to find himself back on the rails and the docks eerily silent. The 4 once determined engines were now silent and scared. Before Jinty could ask them what was happening, Big City Engine rolled out from the shadows. He was glad to see Jinty was alright and urged Jinty to follow him. As they neared the remains of the clay pits, Big City Engine said they were able to re-rail him easily with Cranky, but it took a long time to fix him up, and was sorry that his new buffer and funnel were small, but said they should work till they find better replacements. Jinty didn't have time to process what he had just been told when he sees the horrors awaiting him in the clay pits. Arthur and Bear were both derailed and mutilated. Bear had been completely gutted out, and he was missing his wheels and a buffer, while Arthur was barely clinging onto life. Big City Engine said he spared Arthur just so Jinty could have his first kill. Jinty was horrified by what Big City Engine has become, but he figures out that he doesn't have a choice. On the other side of the clay pits were several workmen from Brendam with their guns drawn and pointed at him. It was kill or be killed, and Jinty buffered up to some trucks filled with heavy stones and proceeded to bash them into Arthur, slowly crushing him to death. Jinty returned to the main shipping area, covered in blood and exhausted, to tell the engines what he was forced to do, and they were horrified. Big City Engine rolled up beside Jinty and told them he would give them a choice. He explained that in this new world it's all about survival of the fittest. They could either join him or they would end up like Arthur and Bear. Donald, being scared for his life, took up Big City Engine's offer and joined his side. Boko and Derek asked to have time to think, but what no one knew was that they were thinking of ways to escape. Douglas, however, was disgusted by the offer and refused. Big City Engine was upset, saying how he could have been useful. Big City Engine, Jinty and Donald were preparing to leave the docks to search for supplies or other engines they could take parts from when Donald's boiler gave out. Donald was in need of a new boiler, and Big City Engine knew exactly where to get it from. The workmen began walking towards Douglas, and soon they began gutting him for his engine. By the time they were finished, the life had been completely drained from Douglas, leaving nothing but a hollow shell. Over the next few days they gutted Duncan, Peter, Sam and Salty, killed Donald due to him trying to save Boko, Derek and Molly, and they kidnapped Spankam at Callan, where they killed him at Brendam. Jinty began to break down after he finished his story, and we comforted the little engine. To think we got he was a threat. To everyone's shock, even James apologized. Jinty smiled and went to sleep. We shut the door to let Jinty get some well-deserved rest. As we all chatted, James said that he and Topham did find out some information from the military back on the mainland. Apparently they captured a Russian spy. The spy claimed that he and several others were sent to Sodor to figure out where the best location was to drop the bomb. But what James would say next would cause all our jaws to drop. The Soviets were also looking for an engine to test their new equipment on, and this engine was Big City Engine. Topham then fell back into the wall, shocked by what had been told. He knew there was something weird about Big City Engine's new crew, but he was never able to put his finger on it. Topham then began to blame himself for everything that had happened, and we comforted him. It was then when we heard the buzzing of a plane overhead, and we looked up, and Henry, Hank and I recognized it as the same type of plane we saw back on the fort. The ear-shattering sound of an explosion was heard far off in the distance, and we didn't take a second to think and quickly began preparing the engines. We then began our sprint for the mainland as planes opened fire on us. The sounds of more explosions were heard in the distance, and they were getting closer and closer. We then heard Emily screaming in fear as he watched a bomb being deployed right on top of us. Hank shoveled coal as fast as he could, and the explosion went off just behind us. The shock wave hit us almost immediately as Henry rocked back and forth. As we passed through Crovan's Gate, we saw Rusty rounding a bend with several coaches. At first he lit up at the sight of us, but that soon disappeared when he saw the airplane. We heard him and people and his coaches scream, but it was cut off by the sound of an explosion. As we entered Vickerstown, we saw a bomb falling above the Vickerstown Bridge. The engines pushed themselves to their limits, and we managed to get over the bridge just in time. We've been at Barrow for a while now, and everyone has calmed down. As we sat around, people began to argue, and a fight broke out. Apparently the soldier who put out the idea of killing Oliver actually tried to go through with his plan, and was stopped in time. After some interrogation, we found out he was a Russian spy. I'm not too sure what happened to him, but I'm just glad we're safe now. Topham has been sitting with the engines for a while now. Most likely to take in the few he has left. I'm not sure what he has planned for us now that Sodor is a wasteland. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Well, it's been a while since I've written in this. I got it best to update this journal one last time and explain where everyone is at right now. First off, Henry and Rosie have been pulling special excursion trains all over Britain, and at times we double-head trains with Scotsmen. However, Henry still has trouble coping with what had happened on Sodor. Oko is still in service, however I have no idea where he's at. Derek was sold to work at Eastleigh Works. Jinty and the green troublesome truck are now display pieces at Paddington and occasionally take trains, and James actually pilots at Paddington. The two managed to bury the hatchet and settle their differences. Molly is currently helping with the war, and finally Duck was sent to the Bluebell Railway where he pulls the mail. So far, everything's been great, however not everyone got a happy ending. BR decided Oliver, Toad and Emily weren't fit for any form of use, they could damage the railway's image, they said. Topham fought tooth and nail to get them preserved, however no one would take them, so they've been sitting in a shed near Barrow. We make sure to check on them whenever we're nearby. Anyways, on a lighter note, there were some more survivors on Sodor we missed. A few hours after we made it to Barrow, Harold landed beside us. He said he had been hiding at the airfield at Drya, and once he saw the final set of bombs falling he quickly got out of there. While he was flying he saw George and Bertie's remains along the roads. The next survivor came in several days after we left Sodor, that being Whiff. The soldiers stationed at Barrow noticed him rolling up to what used to be the Vickerstown Bridge along with a few coaches. They wasted no time and a boat was dispatched to pick him up. He said he had been hiding out at Great Waterton with Stanley and Billy. At some point Big City Engine and his group attacked Great Waterton and gutted Stanley and Billy. Whiff managed to hide in an old shed and stayed within for days. When the final set of explosions happened, Whiff knew it wasn't safe to leave and stayed for a few more days to be safe. Somehow he managed to make it out with little to no burns whatsoever. He's currently on display at the National Railway Museum. Sodor is still a wasteland, and we got confirmation that everyone at Knapford is dead, those being Edward, Diesel, Toby, Harvey, and Neville. Cranky was also checked on, but he was a goner as a bomb had went off on him. Every engine has mostly been accounted for, except a few. Annie Clarabelle, Henrietta Fergus, and the other narrow-gauge engines. Harold has been flying over Sodor every day searching for them and any other poor soul still trapped. I can only hope they're alright, but that's a slim chance. Sir Topham Hatt won't stop searching for them and is trying to convince the military to retrieve the remains of his engines so they can be given a proper send-off, but all requests have been denied due to them most likely being filled with radiation. Sodor may be gone, but we won't forget about those we lost. I'm sure we'll meet again with them someday, but we'll just have to wait and see. Well, I have to go. Our train for London is due, so I must be off. This is Ryoichi Tanaka signing off for the last time. Ryoichi Tanaka, 1972.